The Forgotten Boy, the colony of Vera, was small and unremarkable, tucked away on the edge of known space, and most of the greater galaxy never even bothered to remember its existence. Among its people lived a boy named Arik, a human child who never seemed to fit in with those around him. The settlement was mixed with humans and aliens, but humans were treated as little more than background laborers, fragile and unsuited for the great struggles of the stars. Arik grew up hearing whispers of how weak his kind were compared to the strong-bodied warriors of other races. Even as a child, he felt the sting of their judgment. Alien children would laugh when he tried to keep up with them in games, mocking his smaller frame and slower movements. Their parents often shook their heads with pity, telling him to accept his place. To them, humans were workers, not fighters, and certainly not leaders, but inside Arik there burned something no one could see. Each insult, each sneer, each reminder of human weakness became fuel for a fire that refused to die. When he stumbled, he rose again. When they pushed him aside, he pushed back in his heart, even if he dared not show it yet. He listened carefully to the stories elders told of the galaxy, of ancient wars, of victories and failures. He absorbed knowledge like dry earth taking in rain. His eyes were sharp, always watching, always questioning why things had to be as they were. If humans were so weak, why did his spirit feel unbreakable? His father worked the mines, his mother kept the house, and both of them told him to stay quiet and safe, to not draw the anger of those more powerful. But Arik felt trapped inside a cage, longing for something greater than the dust-choked colony streets. At night he would climb the ridge outside the settlement and look at the stars, whispering to himself that one day he would not just stand among them, he would be heard among them. He did not know how, but he believed it. The turning point came on an afternoon like any other. The colony's markets bustled with life, humans and aliens trading goods, when a band of raiders descended. They came screaming out of the skies in patched ships, firing warning shots that echoed across the settlement. Panic spread, people ran, and the aliens of stronger races grabbed weapons to resist. Arik, still barely a boy, found himself caught in the chaos. He saw younger children trapped in a corner, paralyzed by fear. No adults moved to help them, each too busy with their own survival. Something in Arik snapped. He darted forward, his mind racing not with fear but with solutions. He noticed the smoke pouring from a burning stall and grabbed a cloth, soaked it, and used it to shield the frightened children from the fumes. Then with quick words and gestures he guided them through narrow alleys toward safety. He had no weapon, no power, yet in that moment he became a leader. The children followed him because he spoke with certainty, and they trusted him because he refused to give up. By the time the raiders were driven off, most never knew what the boy had done, but a few had seen. A shopkeeper whispered of the human boy who had acted braver than warriors. A patrol officer noted the strange calm with which he had directed others. Arik himself did not boast. He only returned home, his heart pounding, realizing that he had not frozen in fear like so many others. He had acted, and it had mattered. That night he could not sleep. He stared at the stars longer than usual, his chest full of something he could not name. It was not pride exactly, nor was it anger. It was possibility. If he could do this as a child with nothing, what could he do as a man with training and knowledge? He clenched his fists and swore silently to himself that he would not remain the boy others dismissed. He would grow into someone who could change the story of his people. One day the galaxy would look at him and see not weakness but strength. He did not know that his vow under the stars would echo far into the future, reaching a day when the boy from the forgotten colony would stand before the most powerful council in existence and claim a seat no human had ever touched. The spark of defiance years passed after the raid, and Arik grew into his teenage years still carrying the same fire inside his chest. The colony of Vera remained a forgotten place, a backwater world that mattered little to the galaxy at large, but to Arik every day felt like a step closer to something greater. He worked alongside his father in the mines when needed, studied every scrap of history he could find, and trained his body in secret by running the rocky ridges until his legs ached. To many he remained nothing more than the frail human boy who was destined to break beneath pressure, but he knew that weakness was only what others saw on the surface. Deep inside he nurtured a strength that could not be measured by muscle or size. The moment that revealed it again came during another attack. This time it was not raiders but a wild beast, a massive scaled predator that had slipped through the outer barriers and wandered into the colony. Panic erupted as families scattered and guards scrambled to contain it. The creature's roar sent shivers through even the bravest. In the chaos, Arik saw a group of children frozen in terror near the beast's path, too shocked to move. Without thinking, he sprinted toward them, his mind already racing with a plan. He had no weapon strong enough to face the monster, but he knew how the creature moved. He remembered reading about its species in old files, and recalled their sensitivity to sudden bursts of light. Grabbing a discarded energy lamp, he smashed it against a wall, and the blinding flare stunned the predator just long enough for the children to escape. Guards then swarmed in and drove the beast back, but everyone who had seen knew the truth. It was the human boy who had acted first and saved lives. Whispers began to spread through the settlement again, but this time they carried more weight. Some called him reckless, others brave, but none could deny that he had refused to freeze when others hesitated. His reputation reached beyond the colony when a patrol officer filed a report about his actions. Weeks later, a ship bearing the insignia of the Galactic Academy arrived, its officers searching for recruits. The Academy was a place where the strongest and brightest of many species trained to serve their governments, and sometimes to represent them before the council itself. Humans were rarely considered, yet the report about Arik caught their attention. When the recruiter spoke to his parents, they were hesitant. They knew humans were looked down upon, and they feared Arik would be humiliated or worse. But Arik himself refused to let the chance slip away. He argued passionately, telling them he could not live his life hidden in the mines, that he had something inside him that demanded to be tested. His parents, though fearful, saw the determination in his eyes and finally agreed. And so Arik left the colony behind. Boarding the sleek ship that would carry him to the Academy, the journey was long, and for the first time he saw the vastness of the galaxy, not just in the stars overhead, but in the bustling ports and alien civilizations they passed. Each sight filled him with awe, but also with resolve. He was no longer a forgotten boy staring up at distant lights. He was moving toward the place where those lights converged, the heart of galactic power and learning. When he arrived at the Academy, the reality struck him harder than he expected. The towering halls were filled with cadets of every imaginable species, most taller, stronger, and faster than him. Many laughed openly at the sight of a human walking among them. Some sneered, whispering about how desperate the Academy must be to accept such a fragile creature. Arik felt the sting but did not lower his eyes. Instead, he walked with his head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him bend. Training began immediately, and the instructors wasted no time in pushing the recruits to their limits. Physical drills nearly broke him in the first week, his body screaming with pain as he tried to match strides with beings bred for war. Yet when others collapsed, he forced himself back up even if his muscles burned. During mental exercises, he began to shine more brightly. He solved tactical problems in ways instructors did not expect, noticing details others ignored and finding paths to victory through sheer creativity. Slowly, though many still mocked him, a few began to watch him with respect. In the evenings, he studied long after others slept, poring over data about starship maneuvers, historical battles, and alien cultures. Knowledge became his weapon and endurance his shield. He still heard the laughter in the corridors, but each day he cared less. What mattered was that he was surviving, learning, and quietly proving that humans could not be so easily dismissed. One night, after a particularly brutal drill where he had been forced to carry heavy loads far beyond his natural strength, he collapsed in the training yard long after most cadets had left. A fellow recruit, an insectoid alien with sharp mandibles, approached him and said coldly that he should quit before he killed himself. Arik forced himself to his feet, sweat pouring down his face, and simply replied that one day they would all see why he stayed. He walked away limping but unbroken, and the word spread among the cadets. The boy from Vera was not just enduring. He was beginning to change the way others looked at him. The spark of defiance inside him had become visible, and soon it would set fire to everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans. The harsh trials life at the Galactic Academy only grew harder as Arik advanced through the first stages of training. What had begun as grueling exercises soon became relentless trials meant to break the spirit of recruits. The instructors were not kind, and they singled him out often. Some of them believed that allowing a human into the program had been a mistake, and they wanted to see him fail quickly, so that his example would discourage others of his kind from ever trying again. Every morning he was given heavier tasks. Every drill was extended longer for him. Every mistake punished with harsher consequences. It was as though the academy itself wished to crush him beneath its weight. But Arik did not break. Each time he was thrown down, he stood up again. When his arms trembled under the burden of carrying equipment twice his weight, he pressed his legs harder into the ground and pushed forward. When his lungs burned from endless sprints across the training fields, he willed himself to take one more step, then another, and then another, until he crossed the line. He was slower than most, weaker than most, but he endured, and that endurance began to disturb those who had expected him to quit. The mental trials became his true battlefield. The Academy prided itself on creating leaders who could think under pressure, and simulations of combat were brutal and unforgiving. In these scenarios, Arik began to shine in ways that no one could deny. Where others relied on brute force or instinct, he relied on careful observation and a willingness to use what seemed like weaknesses as strengths. In one exercise, recruits were tasked with defending a supply depot against a superior force. Most cadets rushed to build barricades and concentrated their troops, but Arik spread his forces thin, leaving apparent gaps in the defense. When the enemy charged through, they found themselves trapped in narrow choke points where Arik had hidden explosive charges and ambush squads. His team won the simulation with minimal losses, leaving the instructor silent for a long moment before grudgingly marking his score. Word of his success spread among the recruits. Some began to respect him quietly, though many still mocked him openly. They called him fragile, weak, a mistake, but their voices had lost some of their certainty. The truth was becoming harder to ignore. The human boy who should have been broken was instead proving himself sharper and more resilient than most of them. Yet the Academy was not done testing him. The harshest trial came during survival training. Recruits were left on a barren moon with limited supplies and told they had to endure for 30 days while completing a series of objectives. The conditions were brutal. The days seared with heat. The nights froze with biting cold, and predators roamed freely. Many cadets from powerful species collapsed under the extremes, their bodies not built for such shifts. Arik, though, adapted. He studied the land, found safe paths, created traps for food, and even crafted shelters from scraps of metal and stone. Other recruits began to seek him out, realizing that following him increased their chances of survival. By the end of the 30 days, nearly half the cadets who had lasted credited their survival to the human they had once ridiculed. The instructors watched carefully. They could not deny his results, but still they questioned if endurance and cleverness alone could make a leader. So they devised one last cruel trial, not of body but of will. During a strategy simulation, they placed him in command of a team that included his harshest rivals, cadets who despised him. The mission was designed to fail, a hopeless scenario against overwhelming forces. Many believed he would lose control, that his team would turn on him, and that his reputation would crumble. But Arik did not shout at them or try to command by force. Instead, he spoke with calm conviction, laying out a plan that acknowledged their doubts but promised victory if they followed him. He listened to their objections and adapted his plan to include their ideas, showing respect where none had been given to him. Slowly, begrudgingly, they agreed. When the simulation began, his team fought with surprising unity, and under his guidance they achieved the impossible. They defeated an enemy twice their size by using terrain, deception, and timing. When the scenario ended, even his rivals could not find words to mock him. The Academy had sought to break the human boy. Instead, they had sharpened him. The whispers of failure that had once followed him began to shift into murmurs of awe. Among the recruits, he was no longer just Arik from Vera, the forgotten human. He was becoming something more. A figure who endured where others fell, who thought where others raged, who led when no one else dared. The galaxy still did not know his name, but within the Academy his rise had begun. And deep inside, Arik knew this was only the beginning. He had tasted challenge and overcome it, but greater trials still waited beyond these walls. If the Academy had been this harsh, what awaited him in the vast halls of the Council and the endless wars of the galaxy would be far harsher. Yet he no longer feared it. He welcomed it, for he was ready to prove that a human could not only survive but also lead. The first victory graduation from the early stages of the Academy was marked not by ceremony but by war games, massive simulations that tested every cadet's ability to lead and survive in combat. Arik had survived the harsh trials and was now given a task many thought would expose his limits at last. He was handed command of a small training fleet of outdated vessels and assigned to face an opposing force twice his size. The instructors expected him to be overwhelmed, and many of his fellow cadets whispered that this would be the moment the human was finally humbled. When Arik entered the command deck of his simulator vessel, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. His crew consisted of mixed recruits from various species, many of them skeptical of following a human into battle. Some crossed their arms, others exchanged mocking glances, and a few muttered that they were doomed before the simulation even began. Arik stood calmly before them, his posture steady, his voice clear. He did not try to intimidate them with authority he did not yet possess. Instead, he spoke with quiet confidence, telling them that they would win not by being stronger, but by being smarter. His words carried a strange gravity, and though not everyone believed him, they listened. The scenario began with the opposing fleet advancing aggressively. The standard tactic would have been to meet them head-on, but Arik knew that would lead to certain defeat. Instead, he pulled his ships back into a scattered formation, feigning disorganization. The enemy, sensing weakness, charged forward recklessly. What they did not realize was that Arik had already mapped out the battlefield in his mind, marking asteroid fields and debris clusters as tools for his plan. At his command, his ships darted behind cover, lured the enemy into narrow channels, and then struck from hidden positions. The outdated vessels suddenly became deadly hunters, not through raw power but through precision and timing. The enemy commander, expecting an easy victory, found his forces caught in traps. His ships collided in the tight channels, their formations breaking apart under sudden ambushes. Explosive mines Arik had secretly deployed tore through their flanks. Bit by bit, the larger fleet was whittled down, confusion spreading among their ranks. On the command deck, his crew began to look at him differently. The mocking glances vanished, replaced by startled focus as they realized the human had seen a path to victory where none had seemed possible. The battle raged for hours, but by the end it was Arik's fleet that stood intact while the enemy's was shattered. Silence filled the simulator chamber as the scenario ended. His crew erupted into cheers, some of them laughing in disbelief at what they had accomplished. Even those who had doubted him the most now stared at him with reluctant respect. Arik allowed himself a small smile but remained composed, reminding them that it had been teamwork and cleverness that secured the victory. Inside, however, he knew this was more than just a simulation. It was proof that humans could lead, proof that he could see what others missed, and proof that his rise was no longer a matter of chance but of destiny. When the instructors reviewed the results, their expressions were unreadable. They had not expected this outcome, and some were visibly displeased that the human had outperformed species bred for war. Yet they could not deny the data. Arik's fleet had achieved one of the highest scores in the Academy's history for an exercise of that scale. His name spread quickly beyond the Academy walls, whispered among officers and cadets across different sectors. Some mocked him still, but others began to watch with curiosity, wondering what this human might accomplish next. His rivals within the Academy grew bitter. They challenged him more openly now, attempting to undermine him in exercises and social gatherings. One dual-minded cadet of a reptilian species confronted him in the mess hall, hurling insults about human weakness. Instead of rising to anger, Arik simply replied that weakness was not defined by the body but by the spirit. He walked away without drawing a blade, leaving the reptilian fuming and his peers murmuring. For Arik, every test was not just about survival, but about shaping the image of humanity itself. Weeks later, he was assigned to a new simulation, this time leading ground forces in a mock siege. Once again, he faced a force larger than his own, but he used cunning rather than brute strength. He ordered his troops to feign retreat, luring the enemy into a valley where he had prepared traps with collapsing terrain and hidden charges. The result was another victory, and this time even the most stubborn cadets could not deny his brilliance. His reputation was sealed. It was during the aftermath of this second success that one of the senior instructors finally approached him. The alien's voice was gruff as he admitted that Arik had shown qualities none had expected. He told him that leadership was not about size or strength, but about vision and courage. And though the galaxy might not yet accept a human in such a role, Arik was proving that the old beliefs were wrong. Those words stayed with Arik long after, not as comfort but as a challenge. If he could win respect here, perhaps one day he could win it everywhere. That night, as he stood once more beneath the stars beyond the academy walls, he remembered the vow he had made as a child. He whispered to himself that he was closer now, that the galaxy was beginning to take notice. The boy from Vera had become a commander in simulations. The next step would be battles that were real, and in those battles the fate of entire worlds would rest on his shoulders. Arik was ready. The war erupts. The day came when simulations were no longer enough. The galaxy was thrown into turmoil as a hostile alliance of Outer Rim warlords began a campaign of destruction, raiding border colonies and disrupting trade routes that supplied half the Council worlds. The Galactic Council was slow to act, paralyzed by endless debate and fear of committing their fleets. Many member species bickered over strategy, each unwilling to risk their own forces while expecting others to bear the burden. In the midst of this chaos, the Academy received urgent orders to release its most promising officers into active service. Among those chosen was Arik, the human cadet who had risen from mockery to respect through victories no one expected. He was given a provisional rank and attached to a joint fleet tasked with defending a chain of colonies near the Rim. To many senior officers, this seemed like a mistake, a token gesture to show the Council was inclusive. They did not believe a human boy could contribute much in real battle. But Arik did not let their doubts shake him. He studied the enemy, reading every report and learning their patterns of attack. The warlords fought with brute force and arrogance, relying on superior numbers and raw firepower. They underestimated their opponents just as many had underestimated him, and Arik saw in that arrogance a weakness he could exploit. The fleet he joined was fractured, its commanders from different species mistrusting one another. Meetings devolved into arguments over who should lead and which colony deserved priority. Arik, though the youngest and lowest ranked, spoke up during one such meeting. He reminded them that division would guarantee defeat, and he laid out a plan that seemed reckless at first glance. Instead of scattering their forces to protect each world, he proposed consolidating them and striking directly at the warlords' supply convoys. By cutting off fuel and munitions, they could cripple the enemy without needing to match them ship for ship. The senior commanders scoffed, but one or two listened. When the next raid came, the Council fleet acted on Arik's strategy, ambushing the enemy convoy in a narrow star passage. The result was a stunning victory. The warlords lost half their supplies in a single strike, and for the first time their advance slowed. The fleet returned to base with cheers echoing across the decks. Even those who had doubted Arik began to look at him with new eyes. The human boy had once again seen what others had missed. News of the battle spread quickly. On the colonies that had been saved, families spoke the name of the young human officer who had stood up in the war room and offered a plan no one else dared suggest. Among the warlords, whispers grew of a cunning enemy who fought not with strength but with guile. Arik himself remained focused, knowing that one victory was not enough. The war was only beginning, and the Council was still hesitant to commit fully. In the weeks that followed, the enemy struck harder, sending fleets to overwhelm the colonies that remained vulnerable. Once again, the commanders argued over defense, and once again Arik offered strategies that relied on clever positioning and the use of terrain. He suggested drawing the enemy into a nebula where their sensors would be blinded, allowing smaller Council ships to dart in and out with precision strikes. His plan worked, and another victory was won. With each success, his voice carried more weight in the war councils. The officers who once ignored him now asked for his opinion, some even deferring to him in moments of crisis. But his rise also drew enemies within. Older commanders resented that a human boy was overshadowing them. They whispered that his victories were luck, that his ideas were too risky, and that the Council would regret trusting him. Arik knew their resentment was dangerous, but he did not let it distract him. His focus remained on protecting the colonies and proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy's future. The war escalated further when the warlords united under a single leader, a ruthless strategist named Korath who vowed to burn every Council world that resisted him. His fleets dwarfed anything the border defenses could muster. The Council wavered on the edge of collapse, its members too divided to act decisively. It was during this darkest hour that Arik stepped forward once again. He proposed not just tactics but a bold vision, to unite the fractured Council fleets into a single command structure. He argued that without unity the galaxy would fall, and he spoke with such passion that even seasoned leaders paused to listen. Though many resisted, the growing record of his victories made it impossible to dismiss him outright. Reluctantly, he was granted temporary authority to coordinate a coalition fleet for one decisive battle. It was a gamble, but the council had little choice. For Arik, it was the moment he had been preparing for since the night he first vowed under the stars that he would not be forgotten. The battle came swiftly. Korath's armada advanced toward the colony of Draven, a key stronghold whose fall would open the path to the inner worlds. Arik positioned the coalition fleet in layers, creating false weaknesses to bait the enemy. When Korath committed his forces, Arik unleashed carefully timed counterattacks, turning the battlefield into a labyrinth where the enemy's numbers worked against them. Hours of brutal combat followed, but when the smoke cleared, the council fleet still stood while Korath's armada limped away in retreat. For the first time in living memory, a human had led a coalition of alien forces to victory in real war. The galaxy took notice. Arik had not only defended the colonies, but had proven that leadership could come from the most unlikely place. The boy from Vera was no longer just a cadet or an officer. He was becoming a figure the galaxy could not ignore, a leader rising from the shadows of prejudice into the light of destiny. Rise of the human leader. The victory at Draven changed everything. For the first time, the council worlds began to speak of humanity, not with scorn but with curiosity and even a measure of respect. The boy from Vera, who had once been mocked as weak and fragile, had stood at the heart of a fleet and guided it to triumph against an enemy many believed unstoppable. His name spread through military channels and across colonies where frightened citizens whispered stories of the human commander who had outwitted Korath's armada. What began as rumor soon grew into legend. The council itself could not ignore the growing admiration for Arik. Delegates who once dismissed him as a temporary figure were now confronted with the reality that his strategies were saving lives and protecting their worlds. Reluctantly, they elevated his authority, granting him a provisional seat in the War Council and giving him broader command powers. It was meant to be temporary, a political move to calm public outcry, but Arik treated it as an opportunity to unite factions that had never trusted one another. He began by addressing the soldiers under his command, not as separate species, but as one people facing the same threat. In speeches broadcast to the fleet, he reminded them that fear divided them while hope united them. His words were not decorated with grand promises but grounded in truth, and that truth gave strength to those who heard it. Warriors from reptilian tribes stood shoulder to shoulder with insectoid soldiers. Avian pilots flew alongside human navigators, and slowly, the barriers that had kept them apart began to crumble. They no longer served a council that bickered endlessly. They served a cause, and at the center of that cause stood Arik. As the war dragged on, Korath struck again and again, attempting to shatter the fragile coalition. Each time Arik devised new strategies that turned weakness into advantage. When Korath attacked a gas giant mining station, Arik used the unstable gases as weapons, luring the enemy into explosions that ripped through their fleets. When Korath tried to cut supply lines, Arik spread false signals and decoys that wasted the enemy's resources in empty sectors. Again and again he proved that cunning and courage could triumph over brute force. His victories carried a cost, but each one added weight to his growing legend. Not everyone welcomed his rise. In the council chambers, senior admirals and veteran politicians seethed at the sight of a human youth commanding fleets and rallying armies. Some accused him of reckless risk-taking. Others warned that his popularity threatened to upset the delicate balance of power among species. Plots were whispered in the shadows, attempts to undermine him with false reports or to delay his requests for reinforcements. Arik faced not only the enemy beyond the stars but also the envy and suspicion of those meant to be his allies. Yet he did not falter. He answered insults with results, and with every victory the voices of doubt grew quieter. There was a moment during the height of the conflict when Arik addressed the full War Council directly. Many expected him to plead for support or to boast of his achievements. Instead, he spoke of unity, of the lives lost because of hesitation and division, and of the need to trust in one another if the galaxy was to survive. His speech did not rely on flowery words or threats. It was simple and direct, spoken with the conviction of one who had bled alongside soldiers of every race. By the time he finished, even some of his fiercest critics sat in silence. He had not just argued, he had inspired. Soon after, the Council voted to grant him permanent command of the Coalition fleet, an honor no human had ever received. The announcement sent ripples across the stars. On human colonies, celebrations erupted. On alien worlds, many were astonished that a species once regarded as weak had produced a leader strong enough to command the galaxy's armies. Even among the enemy, the name Auric was spoken with caution. As Korath himself began to see the human as his greatest rival, Auric did not allow himself to bask in glory. He knew the war was far from over, and that every victory only bought more time. Yet in quiet moments he allowed himself to remember the boy who once stared at the stars from the dusty ridge of Vera. That boy had dreamed of being heard among the stars. Now he was not only heard, he was leading. The rise of Auric marked a turning point. Humanity, long dismissed and forgotten, was no longer a background race. Through him they had found a voice, and through him the galaxy was beginning to learn that strength was not measured only in muscle or tradition, but in spirit, in resilience, and in the ability to lead when others faltered. But Auric knew his greatest test was still to come, for the Council was whispering of choosing a new leader to guide them beyond the war. And many eyes were turning to him with expectations as heavy as the stars themselves, leader of the Galactic Council. The war stretched on for months, but the tide had turned. Where once the warlords surged unchecked across the rim, now their fleets limped from battle to battle, hounded by the coalition Auric commanded. Each victory cost lives, yet each one also built a stronger unity among species that had never trusted one another. Soldiers who once sneered at serving under a human now spoke his name with pride. Colonists whispered stories of the boy from Vera, who had risen from nothing to guide the galaxy in its darkest hour. His legend grew with every passing day until even the halls of the Council, long known for their arrogance and endless arguments, could no longer deny it. Korath, furious at his repeated defeats, gathered his forces for one last desperate strike. He aimed directly at the capital world of Valanth, the shining jewel of the Council. If it fell, the morale of the galaxy would collapse and the coalition might fracture beyond repair. The Council debated endlessly, some demanding retreat to preserve their core fleets, others insisting that Valanth must be defended at all costs. Auric listened to their voices, but he did not waver. He stood before them and declared that Valanth would not fall, that the enemy's arrogance had blinded them, and that now was the moment to end the war. With full command granted, Auric organized the largest fleet the coalition had ever assembled. Hundreds of species contributed ships, some small and fragile, others massive and bristling with weapons. The fleet stretched across the void like a sea of stars. At its center stood Auric, calm but burning with determination. He did not see himself as the strongest or the most powerful. He saw himself as the one who could hold them all together. The Battle of Valanth was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed in centuries. Korath's armada descended in waves of fire and steel, crashing against the defenses with relentless fury. But Auric had prepared traps within traps. He lured the enemy into gravitational fields near Valanth's twin moons, turning their size into a disadvantage. He unleashed coordinated strikes from squadrons that had once been rivals, their unity forged under his leadership. For every move Korath made, Auric had already placed a counter waiting. Hours passed and the void became a storm of wreckage and fire. Yet through it all, Auric's voice carried across the fleet calm and steady, reminding every soldier why they fought. At last the moment came when Korath himself, furious and desperate, brought his flagship into the heart of the battle. The massive vessel loomed like a titan, its cannons tearing through allied lines. Fear spread for an instant, but Auric did not falter. He ordered a feigned retreat, drawing the flagship deeper into the chaos. Then, with perfect timing, he signaled a hidden wing of bombers to strike its exposed core. The explosion lit the skies of Valanth, and Korath's reign ended in fire. The warlords scattered, their unity shattered, and the galaxy was saved. When the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended, the Council convened once more. Delegates filled the grand chamber, their voices unusually quiet. For centuries they had debated endlessly, each species guarding its pride. But now they faced a truth too large to ignore. A human, a boy from a forgotten colony, had done what none of them could. He had united their armies, saved their worlds, and inspired their people. One by one, voices rose not in argument but in nomination. They spoke Arik's name, first with hesitation, then with conviction. The call spread until it filled the chamber. They did not merely thank him. They chose him. Arik stood before them, still clad in the simple uniform of a soldier, and heard the declaration that would echo across history. He was to be made the new leader of the Galactic Council, the first human ever to sit upon that throne. Some wept in disbelief, others cheered, and even his rivals bowed their heads in acceptance. Arik himself felt the weight settle on his shoulders. He remembered the boy who once stood on the ridges of Vera, staring at the stars with nothing but hope. Now those stars bent toward him, waiting for his guidance. In his first address as leader, he did not boast of victories or power. He spoke instead of unity, of the strength found not in muscle or weapon but in the will to stand together when all seemed lost. He reminded them that humanity had been overlooked, mocked, and dismissed. Yet from that low place had risen a leader who belonged to all species, not just his own. His words carried across the galaxy, and billions listened. From that day forward, the galaxy remembered the lesson Arik had carved into history. That greatness can rise from the humblest beginnings, that no species should be dismissed, that courage and vision can shape destiny. The boy from Vera was no longer forgotten. He was the leader of the Galactic Council, the voice of unity in a galaxy once divided. And as he looked out upon the stars, he whispered to himself that this was only the beginning, for the galaxy would face new challenges and he would be there to lead them through it. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as subjects, not as shadows, but as leaders. The human who changed the stars. When the war ended, the galaxy entered an era it had never known before. Old grudges that had lasted for centuries began to weaken under the memory of fighting side by side. Species that once distrusted each other now shared bonds forged in blood and sacrifice. And at the heart of this fragile peace stood Arik, the human boy who had grown into a leader none could have imagined. He did not take the throne of the Galactic Council as a conqueror or a ruler who sought power for himself. He sat upon it as a servant of the people, a voice of reason, and a symbol of what could be achieved when pride and prejudice were cast aside. Every council session that followed was filled with voices demanding their own interests, yet Arik guided them with patience. He reminded them of the lives saved because they had stood together. He reminded them of the worlds that still needed rebuilding. His leadership was not about commanding fleets anymore, but about shaping the future. His strength lay in the trust he had earned, and that trust held the galaxy together in a time when it could have easily broken apart. On Vera, the dusty colony where his journey began, children grew up hearing his story not as a tale of distant legend, but as proof that even the smallest voice could echo across the stars. The ridge where he once stared into the night sky became a place of pilgrimage, where humans and aliens alike stood to remember that greatness often rises from the most forgotten places. His parents, once fearful that he would be mocked and crushed, lived to see him honored by worlds they had never dreamed of visiting. They watched their son not just survive but carry the hopes of billions. Even his enemies could not deny his place in history. Former rivals spoke of him with reluctant respect. Commanders who had once scorned him now admitted that his vision had saved them all. And across the galaxy, ordinary people found hope in the idea that no race, no person, no child born in obscurity should ever be dismissed as weak or unworthy. As years passed, Arik's name became more than a name. It became a symbol written into the very foundation of the council. Statues were raised in his honor, not of a warrior with weapons drawn, but of a man standing with open hands, reminding all who saw it that leadership was not about fear, but about courage and unity. And yet Arik himself remained humble, carrying himself as the same boy who once looked at the stars and whispered of a destiny no one else believed. In his private moments, he still walked to the balconies of Velanth and stared at the endless night. He knew that challenges would always return, that peace was fragile, and that the galaxy would test him again and again. But he also knew that humanity had claimed its place not through conquest, but through the power of resilience, cleverness, and the will to stand when others fell. That truth could never be erased. When he closed his eyes, he could still see the colony, the laughter of alien children mocking him, the long nights spent dreaming of the stars, the fear of the raids, the exhaustion of the academy, the first taste of victory, the crushing weight of command, and the final roar of triumph as the galaxy bowed not to a soldier but to a leader. His story was not only his own, it was the story of all humanity, a race underestimated until one of its sons showed them what they truly were. And so the galaxy remembered. The boy became a leader, the leader became a legend, and the legend became eternal. The end.